going, everybody? Welcome back to a Monday edition of the Ad Podcast. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Got a fun guest to talk to you guys about today. David Rosenberg is co-founder and chief creative officer of Brand Up Comedy, a agency that connects stand-up comedians and comedic talent to the world of brand marketing. Prior to this, he led creative teams at agencies like Publicis.Sapient and VaynerMedia, working on iconic brands like Ferrari, Samsung, Mountain Dew, to name a few. David, thanks so much for coming on and telling us a little bit about what you're up to.
Glad to be here, man. This is fun. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, let's go. So tell me a little bit about your origin story. I think it'll be, somewhat unique knowing that you spent a good portion of your career as a working stand-up and a comedy writer, and then kind of found your way into the advertising and marketing space. And would love to hear, where you went to school and where you studied, how you got the comedy bug, and how that led you to the marketing world.
I mean, the comedy bug goes back. That's a family story. That's, as a child of divorce, that you could go one of two ways, and so I went the comedy route. So I don't know if we want to go deep into that.
I think origin stories are important, and it sounds like you channeled it in a way that was more productive, right?
For sure. No, I mean, I was an actor, and I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. I went to a performing arts high school, and that was what I was going to do, and just be in comedy and sketch and improv and all things comedy. And then, it was either LA, Chicago, New York, and Chicago for me felt a little bit too close to Louisville, Kentucky. So I went to New York, and really just spent my time doing the waiter thing and performing at night and hitting clubs and just trying to do stand up. And when I got to New York, I was like, I'm just going to do improv and sketch because that's what I knew. And then I realized I don't know anybody, so you can't do that shit on your own. So as somebody who didn't have any money when I got to New York, I was like, well, I think I want to do stand up, but I don't know how to start. And so I called a stand up comedy school, and I was like, hey, I'm thinking about joining, tell me about the classes. And so she was like, well, the first thing I'm going to do is, I'll have you write what makes you angry. And I went, okay, cool. And that was kind of how I just basically stole that. And that's how I started doing stand-up. I didn't go. I was like, let me just write 5 minutes. So I did. I was in comedy for a long time. And then, I was approached by somebody when I did a set, after a set, who was like, hey, you're really funny. Do you want to write for me? Sure. It's a gig. And I ended up working for a startup, just like a .com back in the day, and doing entertainment stuff. And so I kind of fell into it. I mean, I remember the first day I was so dumb. The first day somebody was like, can you CC me on that email? And I didn't know what you meant. I was like, I don't. Sure. And I had to ask people. So this was early days, and just kind of went through the internet days early on, and then fast forward to 2000-ish, and met my now wife. She was working in advertising. She was a producer. She got hired at Crispin down in Miami. So we kind of, let's pick up shop and go to Miami. And I was like, I need a gig. And so I lied my way into an agency in Miami and told them I was a producer. Wrote a radio spot at some point, and they were like, now you're a writer. So that's kind of how my career started.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so went from Miami to Publicis, back to New York, worked at VaynerMedia for several years. Most recently, a couple years ago, to a place called Known. Just kind of jumped around a lot. But comedy was always such a big part of who I am and who I was, and always tried to bring it through. And so that's kind of the advertising story. But then there's the whole other how do you get to brand up story. So
Yeah. Well, I think you've given us, a good kind of resume retrospective, and I feel like I have an understanding of how you were able to make that transition gracefully. But
that's a
then,
fair.
yeah.
I mean, gracefully is a good word. I don't know if it's the right, but it's a fair word. Yeah.
So tell me more about how'd you come up with the idea for brand up comedy with your partner, and what was kind of the inciting incident around that made you guys think, oh well, what the brand world needs is they
Yeah.
need more interaction with the real comics, and they need to be more funny.
I think that when we talk to clients, we always talk about, there's always like, we create an enemy, right? So there's ad funny, and then there's sort of real funny. And I think when I say that to people, they know what that means, what ad funny versus real funny is. And so, I was running a creative department at my last agency, and I kind of had this idea. I was like, I want to interview comics about their first set, like the first time they ever got on stage, because I thought it was like super interesting. And so I thought like that would be a cool podcast. So was introduced to my now business partner, Donnie, who owns Stand Up New York. Interestingly enough, so he's owned it for about 15 years. Stand Up New York's been around since the 80s. And it was actually my home club when I did stand up. So it kind of he didn't own it then, but it kind of comes.
Wow.
And so I pitched him this podcast, and we started kind of jamming on it. And then I was sitting, I don't know, my wife and I were away for the summer, and she was like, why are you doing a podcast? Why don't you just like do your own thing? It's like, I don't know what that looks like. Like, I don't know what that means. And the name came first. Like, brand up comedy just popped into my head. And I was like, Donnie, we're not doing this podcast. Like, we should start a company. And that's how it was formed. Like, we kind of didn't know what we wanted it to be. It really stemmed from me saying, like, I just want to be around comics again. Like, I just want to spend time around comics, and I want to do stuff that's actually funny, like really, really funny. Not, okay, that's funny, and it doesn't elicit a laugh. And so brand up comedy was born.
I love it. I love it. So, there's a lot to unpack there. When you were thinking about this idea for a client around, sorry, you were thinking about this idea where, you had to basically come up with this podcast idea for the client, and that you were going to interview stand-ups about their first set. What was the insight around, like, what was the brand who would care about comics and care about that creative insight? Like, because I think that's like one of the things you saw really early, like with TikTok, is that Amazon was pretty much using only stand-up comedy material for their TikTok ads.
Yeah.
And you had like basically like just stand-ups licensing their sets, and that was because like everybody with TikTok, they're like, well, I need something funny to be on TikTok, and that was like the only way that they, like, how is Amazon going to be creative and show up on TikTok and be funny? Well, why not just like repurpose comedian sets, and that'll be our ad, right? So like, what was it about comics and kind of that first set that you thought would be like an insightful podcast or thought would be interesting to your client?
I mean, it wasn't even for a brand, Dylan. It was just like me sort of saying, like, I miss comics.
I love that.
Yeah. And I just want to talk to them and be around them. And like that I get a lot of inspiration from them. And so it was selfish. It was like, I just want to kind of like hang out with people and hear their story, because I know what my story is, and I'm not doing it anymore. And I think in the back of my head, I was always like, I always felt kind of guilty that I wasn't doing it. Like, you play the game of like, what if? And so there were just a lot of comics out there that I was following, that I was really fascinated by. And so, yeah, it was like going to be extracurricular for me.
I love that.
Like, yeah. And so it was like, let's just talk to them. It's interesting to talk about Amazon, because I think the first iteration of brand up was, it's just how kind of naive we were. It was because if you remember, there was like a Jim Gaffigan bit he did about Hot Pockets. I don't know if you know this. Like,
I do. Yeah, of
right.
course.
He does like a famous Hot Pockets bit, which clearly Hot Pockets didn't pay for. And then I think years later, I think they sponsored a tour of his.
Mm-hmm.
And then like there was Sebastian Maniscalco did a thing about Peloton. So the idea was like, oh, what if you did something like called sponsored stand-up, where you could have famous comics work in brands into the act, almost like a read, but they're getting paid for it. And we tried to do that, but it failed miserably because it wasn't authentic.
It's
Whereas, like,
almost like you have to go the other direction, like let these comedic moments happen organically in the world and then go like license them like
that's
UGC or
it.
something like that.
Yeah. And we were
Mhm.
sort of like, we talked to comics and they were like, I hate that. I hate that idea. I'll never do that. Like, because like I'm talking, and suddenly I'm like, oh, and Mountain Dew. And you're like, it
Yeah,
doesn't make
it's not
sense.
funny unless like the joke was done like without participation. It almost feels kind of gross to like, you
Yeah.
know, do it
And
like work it into a natural set if it wasn't like if
exactly.
it didn't come up organically. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I kind of fell back on what I knew, which was I know how to talk to comics because I still sort of operate in that head. Um, Comics are very tricky in that they don't, it's a very kind of sort of closed community. Um, and it's like advertising in many ways. Like, have you been through what I've been through? Are we at the same sort of level? And so I always felt like I, I did enough stand up that I could kind of hang with comics and not feel like a suit. Um, and it was really like, let's just make things that are funny. Like, let's find a brand that we think wants to just try something and we'll sort of like learn on the back of that brand. And that was like a friend of Donnie's who had a protein bar company. We just like did some man on the street stuff. And I think we learned a lot about what works, what doesn't, because I think in the early days we tried to make them sort of like commercials,
Mm-hmm.
which wasn't, yeah, to your point earlier, like it doesn't ring true or authentic. And so we've been lucky enough to work with brands that like they know comedy is the thing. They don't want to make things that are sort of corny, and they want to work with people in an authentic way and make things that are authentically funny. And we always say like, I can't guarantee that it's going to be funny because that would be ridiculous and silly if we did, but we'll try and we'll test and we'll learn and so it's been very much like the part about the advertising that I bring to it is like, there's the strategy part, being able to speak to a client in a way that's not like, I don't trust these people. Right. But then on the other side of it, being able to work with comics and make them feel safe and able to do their best work. So we basically use comedians as if they're creatives and agencies.
That's cool, man. I love it. So, how much is like the briefing process kind of a traditional, because I think about like you talk about this idea of like, you have to be able to set a strategy with a client and figure out like what are the objectives and what they're trying to communicate, what their goals are. And then you need to kind of translate that to like, the way that a comedian works in their process. So tell me a little bit about like how does that sausage get made and what is
Yeah.
that middle layer, right? Like how does a brand approach you or how do you approach a brand? How do you get the key elements out of them that you need to give that to a comedian and what does the comedian go off and do?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is just the conversation, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
look, some of my closest friends are strategists. I mean, from agency life, like if you have an amazing strategist, your job is sort of done for you. And
Mhm.
so a lot of the early conversations are just conversations. Like, what do you like? What kind of humor do you like? What kind of, what's kind of from a comedy perspective, right? Like, let's understand the type of humor first before we actually start to talk about, okay, cool. What are we trying to solve here? And sometimes it's like we have a hypothesis that humor works, but we don't know. Or we have an agency that's doing sort of the bigger sort of shiny stuff, but we think that we want to kind of dip our toe into this other space. And so can we just do a little thing just to see? And maybe we put a little bit of paid behind it. So we're very much in like a test and learn environment. We haven't really gotten into the place where somebody goes, okay, cool. You're our AOR. You're going to do every single thing, because, we're not at that point yet. We would love to take that, and we would love to scale up there. And that's eventually where we'd love to be. But it's really just kind of gut. Right. I mean, I think that when comics talk to each other, comics don't generally laugh at each other. They'll just say like, oh, that's funny. It's just like a recognition that it's funny. And so I think as we think about the work, we go like, okay, that's funny. That feels right. And then when we work with the comics, usually it's a premise. Usually we'll find the right comic. We have about 500 or so that we can pull from. And that's based on what audience you're trying to reach, brand, or is there a reach audience? Is there one you want to dip into that you haven't tried? And so we have comics that are moms, we have comics that are, 60 plus, we have comics that are just starting out at various stages. And so like you find the ones that you think have the right voice and have the right perspective. We sort of bring them an idea, and then they just start developing it. So like, we want to do this video, it's shot here, this is kind of the premise, and then they just start adding to it. So it's really a lot of just kind of concepting with them. And then they get cast in it, which is, it's not just like an agency creative where I make the thing and I cast it, but they feel ownership of it because they're in it as well.
That's awesome. So are all the scopes where you're ultimately looking to find a comedian who will also be like on-screen talent, or is there ever a situation where you're just leveraging them for their comedy writing and their ideas, but they maybe wouldn't translate to being like in front of the camera? Or is it always the goal is to get them in front of the camera?
Always get them in front of the camera, because then they feel more ownership of it.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. And so you're actually concepting with the person that is going to be in the thing. So they're thinking about it from not just a funny perspective, but from a performance perspective. Like, can I say this? Is it going to be true to who I am? And then can I act the part? So there are comics I think that we've worked with that we just sort of know like, oh, he's going to be killer at doing a monologue just because we know the material, how he works. Or this one's going to be great man on the street, or this one's going to be great dance, like just because we know the act. And a lot of them have agents and managers and teams and all that stuff. But we kind of skirt by that because we're not putting them in Super Bowl spots.
That's cool. So it's kind of like a little bit of a backdoor way to collaborate with comedians without having to like turn it into like a big CAA, like, 6-figure situation.
Yeah. And we've done that. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely worked with some name comics. There's a fashion brand we work with that we've done a couple things with, and they like big names. But interestingly enough, what we can leverage is, okay, cool, maybe we can't give you the payday that you want, but here's X amount of dollars in clothes. Or here's something else, like, and here's a great experience, or here's a new audience, or, so I think as comics, I mean, we're able to get some comics to do things we never want to. And, we obviously pay them fairly, but there's some comics that are like, you don't have to pay me. This is just fun. Like,
wow. It's kind of like the old school days of doing like Funny or Die skits or whatever. Like people are just doing it because well, the reality is like if you're part of a viral, I mean, you never want to say those words in front of the client, but if you're part of something that gets attention and goes out there and creates a lot of earned media, like everybody's kind of star rises in a way.
Yeah, we've had, I mean, probably the first thing that we did that got us some attention was there's a brand in New York called Manhattan Mini Storage, and they sort of like, they're famous for doing billboards that are like very political, or like, they have a very kind of a sharp point of view. Like they're not afraid to kind of touch the third rail on things.
Mhm.
So we just had this, a lot of times we'll just come up with the punchline. We don't know what the bit is yet, but we'll have the punchline. And the punchline was like, oh, what if we did a bunch of sets in storage units and filmed it, and let's see how that goes. And so we had an audience of like 5 people in a 3x5 storage unit and 15 people, and we shot for 2 days, and we had like people showed up, like there were people, like we had to turn people away. And we got like a year's worth of content for a client. Like we shot
Wow.
a ton of stuff for them. And so that was one of those things, was like, we can do stand up in different places, or we can do conceptual things with stand ups being in them. So I think we've gotten much more confident in our ability to kind of do all the things.
Yeah, I love that. That kind of leads me into another question I wanted to ask, which is the idea of like stand up in non-stand up environments is almost kind of funny in itself,
Yeah.
right? Like you talked about this idea of doing like stand up in a storage locker. You could see like doing stand up on the side of the road, just like talking to people as they walk by and kind of like
Yeah.
doing the traditional, like, when you pick on somebody in the audience thing. Um, and then there's probably a lot of other places where you could kind of do a stand up routine that is outside of the environment of a club.
Hmm.
Um, and that would probably work very interestingly because it's, just an area in which you're not like expecting it and you're kind of getting people by surprise. Um, was that kind of something that you guys thought would be part of the process all along, or was that something that just kind of came to mind as you guys were concepting out for this mini storage client?
Yeah, I think we just thought like comics being comics in unexpected place, like to your point, like let's just throw them in there and see. And I think every comic that we brought in, and we actually did another one at the New York Comedy Festival last year, so we've done 2 now. It's such a weird thing for them that they're just like psyched to do it. And I think, that was kind of the early days. And I say early days, we're like 2 years old, but in the early days it was like, let's just do stand up in a bunch of different places and let brands get credit for it. But now we're seeing like, look, there's brands like Dr. Squatch, right? They'll just do stand up and they have the logo in the background. Or I think people are seeing that stand up, to your point earlier, is obviously very it's very social, and the algorithms love it, and it shows up, and it gets, the brand gets credit for it even if somebody's not even talking about the brand. So I think we kind of, while we're very comfortable just putting stand-ups in different places, we also want to push clients into doing things that maybe they're familiar with. So like, let's do a spot. Let's shoot us, like we shot a commercial for a car wash brand, like just weird kind of stuff. And that was putting a stand up in the back of a car while somebody went through a car wash. Like they just jumped in the car and
Mm.
started doing stand up, or sit down. So it's basically like a minute bit. So there's the version of that, but then there's also the version of like, let's just come up with funny scenarios and funny premises, and let's have comics sort of act as actors or behave as actors.
I love that. And
Yeah.
then you talked about the New York Comedy Festival.
Mhm.
How often do you try and tie the creative or the production to something that's more experiential,
Mm.
where it is like, okay, like, well, comedy is not just a great thing to capture film around, but it's a great experience to bring consumers in to have a touch point with the brand. It's a great way to attract moths to the flame, so to speak. Like, do you think about these as like eventized moments where you can kind of bring in a crowd to get like
Mhm.
that, in real life experience and brand touch point? Or are you
Yeah.
usually thinking about these as more controlled production environments where, you want to have an audience for the laugh factor, but, you don't want to get too crazy and too unpredictable with letting too many people in the room?
I think we've done a little of both. I mean, we've definitely done performances where a brand will, sponsor the night, or Manhattan Mini Storage becomes the venue. We've also, like I said, done man on the street stuff where we're just sort of like kind of bum rushing people and they don't realize like what's happening, to to really like scenario based stuff. Like you can imagine, and it's no surprise, we've worked with a couple weed brands because they work with comics. And so we've done things that are much more sort of like spoof based things. One thing I'm thinking about is there's a few years ago, Manischewitz, if you know the
Yeah,
brand.
it's the wine that's kind of traditionally
Yeah.
thought of as like tied to the Jewish community.
Yeah, they did a big rebrand. So they just did a big, like, I think it was a few years ago. And so it was a brand that's been around since, God, 1800s, whenever we sort of came over from wherever we came from, and like the brand came to life. And so I think it was probably the 1800s. And the brand has been very much the same. They did a big rebrand and they sort of created all these little characters that like little doodles that are all over the packaging. So our pitch to them was, cool, let's bring one of them to life. So the first one was like a Jewish grandmother. So we had a comic who plays the sort of a Jewish grandmother, and they had there's a big sort of food convention, the fancy food show. It happens in Vegas, happens in New York. So we let her kind of run around and play that character in the convention. And it just created a lot of attention for the brand, right? Like people come, I love the brand. So like the brand was able to hear people say, I love you. I love this brand. I love her, and take pictures. And I think that was, again, that was a real moment for us when we said like, oh, comedy can actually, it doesn't have to be like this. I can actually be one-on-one with somebody and have a real experience,
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that idea of sending, stand-ups to like this like non-traditional environment of like a B2B conference. I remember I worked with Tripp and Tyler, the guys that did the conference call in real life sketches back in the day.
Yeah.
And they're kind of known for doing this type of work in the B2B sector, which is kind of like a boring sector to begin with. Like, how do you make B2B funny? And they had this concept of like, like sending a bunch of like stereotypical characters to like a B2B conference, like the aggressive sales guy, the PR girl, and like, how would it be to like have those people in improv, like interacting with the conference and creating, like a branded series, like in real time. So I love that idea of kind of like taking these like non-traditional environments, like a conference or a festival or something like that, and having that be like your backdrop.
I think it's interesting you say that. So one of the things that we had heard, we were doing sort of new business, and it's like, it's a constant sort of grind, is the new business grind. But, sometimes, so when I was first starting out and first starting comedy, I remember meeting somebody. It was an older comic who said, I don't know how we got in the conversation. It was at a club. Basically said, if you're good enough, you can make anything funny. Like the darkest thing, if you're good enough, you can actually make it funny. And that's when you're a very good stand-up, is like you can talk about like the unspeakable. And so for us, we're very brand agnostic because we really believe that you can make anything funny. And I don't mean like knee slapping funny, but like, can I bring humor? Can we bring a smile? Can we bring a chuckle? So, early days we would I remember talking to somebody who was like, ran yoga studios. And he's like, well, I just don't see how you can make yoga funny. You're kidding. Like,
yeah, they must not have I've never saw the Johnny Knoxville, skit where he goes into the yoga studio and starts ripping ass, right?
It's amazing. And so I think sometimes we would get these like emails back from people, and they're like, my retirement home there's nothing funny about a retirement home. But so you have to kind of get people to have a perspective on their business that they don't usually have. And I think that's, so to your sort of point earlier, like B2B is hysterical. Like it could be really, really funny. You just need somebody to take that chance.
Yeah, totally. So, you've answered a little bit of this question in your last answer, this idea that, humor is to some degree brand agnostic. And the more you think your brand isn't funny or shouldn't be playing in humor, the more of a challenge it is, and the more that it takes a really good comic and a really good comedic premise and team to actually make that come to life. But when you do have kind of the world at your fingertips, I imagine drilling down and trying and finding brands that have a sensibility or have signals in the world that can kind of lead you to the idea that, okay, like you mentioned this mini storage company, you noticed that they were already kind of taking like an edgy political stance.
Mhm.
Do you when you think about new business or people to approach, do you look for outward signals that kind of say like, okay, like these guys are scratching the surface, they're doing something here either through their social media or their last campaign or their website, they seem to not be taking themselves too seriously, or something about their brand voice leads me to believe that they might be open to this type of a tactic.
Hmm.
Is that how you approach it, or do you just kind of talk to any marketer who's willing to have a conversation with you
Yeah,
and
I
go
think
the
it's
other direction?
it's really the latter, and I think if I don't have to sell you on why your brand is funny, it makes our life easier. And so
Mm.
it if you already come sort of predisposed to know, look, I get calls from I just wanted to talk to you because this sounded like a crazy idea, or I love stand up, or I've always thought that we do humor, but we don't do it well, or you know, I have this idea. I think it might work for us, but I'm not sure. So it's never a hard sell. It's really just like, it's fascinating the types of brands we speak to. Like we've worked with, you know, the usual suspects, right? We work with Blue Chew, we work with Dude Wipes. Like those are the ones that you can imagine that we'd work with. But then, yeah, we work with a high-end fashion brand, or you know, uh, 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 like a Listerine strip kind of a brand, but it's not Listerine, but like a strip that like absorbs into your skin and makes you less tired, right? Like it literally everything. Um, it's really run the gamut. A car wash company, you know. So yeah, it's a marketer that is either bored with what they're doing or didn't know they wanted it, and then we sort of present it and they go like, this is what I was looking for and I didn't realize it.
Oh, that's great. All right. Who are some of your biggest comedic influences?
Um, yeah, I mean it's all stand-ups. Like there's nobody sort of like advertising folks that I think that I would serve, but like, yeah, I mean Steve Martin, I think, was kind of the first comic that I saw that I was like, oh, you can be silly as an adult. Um, everybody from Steve Martin. I mean, I worked at Caroline's, which I don't know if you're aware of, but when I was,
Yeah.
yeah, so I spent some time at Caroline's and I sort of saw everybody. So, it's sort of like your Chappelle's to, there's some that are problematic that I won't say, but they're super inspiring to me. As a comic. And then look, there's a comic working today that I really love, a guy named Rory Scovel, who there's a freedom to what he does that feels like he's not doing stand up. So yeah, I think Steve Martin was probably the main one that kind of started it off for me.
I love that. Um, is there a brand right now out there that you think embodies the right way to approach comedy and or brand and humor? Like, is there a brand out there that you point to as like, okay, those guys are getting it right. They're hitting the sweet spot
Yeah,
between
I mean,
their brand identity and humor.
Liquid Death is like everybody talks about Liquid Death, but like they're the
Of
perfect sort of
course,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I mean they're, and I love those guys, and I sort of crossed paths with them in the advertising days, and the fact that they were sort of born from advertising, not born from water, um, allows them to have a certain amount of freedom, like a lot of freedom in what they do. So you know, we've talked to them a couple times, and it's funny. They're sort of in that place, like everybody, like we don't need to go out and find like people pitch us. So love you guys, but like we don't need to work with you, but we can be fans from the sidelines, you know.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, I know they. I think I read a quote from, is it Andy Dunn, who's the creative director over
Pearson,
there?
Andy Pearson.
Or Pearson, that's right. Yep. And
Yeah,
I remember reading a quote from him recently where it's like, we don't create, campaigns, like we don't sell water, we create entertainment,
yeah,
and they really approach it from the perspective of like they're writing a TV show, or like, it's
yeah,
like it's wild stuff.
yeah.
So much fun, and like, they just keep, resetting the bar. So yeah, I think I would have to agree with you. If there's like a modern equivalent who's doing it really well, they definitely are stealing a lot of the limelight.
Absolutely.
Um, is there an ad, like a specific campaign or a specific ad or a specific piece of marketing that is your favorite, you think utilizes humor, or something that you could point to and say, that was a great, funny Super Bowl that should be remembered for all time?
Um, I think it's funny you said like, and this is gonna sound like super egotistical, and I don't mean it to, but there's actually the last thing that I did at Vayner that I think is the one thing that for me sort of embodies who I am as a creative. But I don't. Again, it's funny, Dylan. I never, even though I was in advertising and I worked at a lot of agencies, I never felt like I was sort of in advertising, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I feel more like I'm in the industry now than I ever did.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we did a thing at VaynerMedia for Miracle Whip, which, if you know Miracle Whip,
Yeah.
yeah, and so basically, there's a town in Florida called Mayo, Florida. It's like 1,200 people, and we convinced the town that we were changing their name to Miracle Whip. And it was like a big deal. It was like, we did sort of like a mini documentary about it, and we freaked out a whole town. So I don't know but I think that to me was a thing for me, at least in my career, where I was like, oh, there's no rules. Like we can do whatever we want to do as long as we're, if you find the right client, the right brand, the right team, the right idea, like, you can sort of do anything.
Yeah. And, you talk about Liquid Death did that one where they like sponsored the town of like Arizona, but they found like this small
Yeah.
Arizona, like Illinois or something like
Yeah.
that, like as like a kind of a direct bite, going after Arizona iced tea, because they have like the most name awareness around the iced tea category. So I love those like fun kind of like all include those that kind of tie into like this product moment that's, you're trying to go after like a moment or a place or something like that can kind of like transition your brand message. So
I will say there is one thing that I always come back to, and it's probably like speaks volumes about the kind of creative that I was, but Diesel, I don't know if you remember this, I think it was Diesel Jeans did a video, and they were celebrating 25 years or 20 years or 10 years or something like that. But basically they took old porn from like the 80s, and everything that was like super graphic, they would put like cartoon of like somebody blowing a trombone, but you knew what was happening underneath it, or like somebody shaking a maraca, but you knew what was happening. But it was like, anybody could watch it, but you knew what was happening underneath the animation.
Yeah.
That to me, it was like, okay, that's.
I love it. I love it.
It's crossed the line, but has it.
So fun. So working at Vayner for as long as you did you get to work very closely with Gary? Is he a funny guy? Does he like this approach to advertising?
Yeah, it's so when I guess it was last year, I texted him and yeah, I just kind of like wanted his advice. I think I had a question or something, and I don't know. We talked, and he was talking about. I was like, well, I did stand up, right? And he's like, well, yeah, that's why I hired you. I was like, really? I was like, I didn't know that. He's like, yeah, that's why I hired you. So, I I think that he always had. Look, I think that there were a lot of sort of early days of like, who is this guy and what's he doing and his imposter. But like the thing that I knew about him and the thing that I still know is like, he's fearless,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
really fearless. Yeah. And the speed that we operated there is like insane. Like there were accounts that were run by text. And I got very used to working that way, like just working very fast, like big decisions made in a very modern way.
I love that.
Yeah.
Literally running an account by text. Yeah, I've seen him speak many, many times, and the last two times I've heard him speak, I've never seen him repeat the same speech before.
Mhm.
So it really stood out to me that he hit on the same point twice in a row because he's usually like moving so fast that every time you hear from him, it's a whole fresh new take. But he seems to be on this huge kind of push right now that, you know, because of algorithms, brands have never had a more level playing field because it doesn't matter how many followers you have anymore. It matters how good your content is.
That's it.
So if you are not investing at least 20% of not your creative budget, not your media budget, not your working, non-working, 20% of your marketing budget flat in
Mm-hmm.
organic content creation, and then testing that content in these vertical video channels that give you free audience if your content is good, then you're literally wasting money if you're just like creating stuff in a vacuum now.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, what's great about him and what I sort of knew is like none of that stuff came just in his head, right? His all of that came from him being the case study. So I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to see if it works. I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to actually say like, cool. Now I'm going to scale it out to my agency, and we launched something. So a lot of brands that we've talked to have said like, hey, I don't want to do a big production. Like I just want to try a lot of things to that point and see what sticks. And so we actually just launched something last, I think it's 2 months ago. Sorry for the pun, but it's called the Concierge, which essentially is your own comic who is creating content for you and pitching ideas. And so think about a comic who's really good at putting stuff out there in the world, creating for brands. And
yeah,
that's
I
been
love
kind
that.
of, and that's sort of a very small version of that sort of Gary philosophy, which is like,
Yeah. Well, it's like this idea of like the chief TikTok officer
mhm,
or having like an internal spokesperson that's on your team,
yeah,
or it's kind of like the idea of like the founder led brand where, you've got this like lightning rod CEO that's out there like dropping hot takes on LinkedIn and TikTok
yeah,
and everywhere. He's out there doing speeches and podcasts, not necessarily because he needs to be out there doing those things, but because they're like kind of like proxies for a production day. It's
yeah,
like you're putting in yourself in these interesting moments that are kind of interesting backdrop, interesting camera. Like a lot of ways, that's what this podcast is for me. Like
mm,
I get to talk to interesting people, but then I get, after you and I get off the line, I'm going to have five, AI generated videos about this conversation
right,
that each have
yeah,
a virality score, and those are gonna
yeah,
that's gonna be where the real traction comes from is the short form clips that come out of this. So yeah,
it's funny.
I love that idea of like
Yeah,
that, like having like a stand up almost like as part of the team where, they're available to kind of like be proactively bringing you ideas and
mhm,
concepts that are funny, but also timely, right? Because
yeah.
the average social media moment dies in 72 hours. So you got to move fast.
So we got the reason why we started working with Blue Chew is uh, this is why one of a million times that LinkedIn worked for me. I had seen a comic talking about Blue Chew, and it was the middle of the night, and sometimes I'll wake up, text shit to somebody and not remember it in the middle of the night. But I sent a message to the CMO of Blue Chew, and I woke up and there were like 3 messages on my LinkedIn from him, and he was like, "Let's talk." And I was like, "I don't remember doing that." And then and then the next day, the Haktua thing happened, and I love that I can say like the Haktua thing. It was like, yeah.
Of
He was
course.
like, "I need Haktua videos like now." So I called up 10 comics, and we turned around 10 Haktua videos that by the end of the day, because I knew that comics had a perspective immediately when they heard Haktua. Like, I knew comics had a perspective on it, and I think it's funny because I was thinking in an agency, there's no way we would have been able to do that. Like, there's no
Wow.
way we've been able to scale. But I know a comic will have a perspective on anything because if they're good, that's their job.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Like basically they're kind of like our, cultural barometers. Like they
Yeah.
need to know what's happening and they need to have a take on all this stuff. So
Yeah. No,
um
I was just going to say,
good.
because us as an audience need comics to tell us what to think. So
Hmm.
that's
No,
my
I
that's
love
my
that. I love
comment.
that.
Yeah.
All right. Back to the insights piece. What is the biggest brand fail that ever tried to use comedy in their marketing that you can think
Oh man.
of?
Wow. I mean, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I don't know that it was a brand fail. I think it was a brand that used it and backed themselves into a corner, and now
Mm,
it killed their brand. So like I think about Axe.
mm.
Like Axe was comedy. And then I think because of the marketing and because they were so like that world, I don't know that they can ever come back. And
Interesting.
I say that because I worked on Axe at Vayner, and like they tried to walk away from it, and people were like, "No, no, 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 no. You're a high school brand. Like that's all you'll ever be."
That's
So
interesting. So it's almost like when the Jeep Cherokee people take over your social feed and you can never post anything but a Jeep Cherokee again,
right,
or the people will go
yeah,
ape shit.
that's it. So I don't know. Look, I'm okay. Like if you're gonna try comedy, God bless. And if it works, God bless. If it doesn't work, okay, cool, you tried. But I think if that is everything that you stand for, and then you expect people to see you in a different way, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
Um, so
Love it. All right. I forgot to ask your permission, but I'll ask it anyways. Can we talk about what you're doing at Adweek in a couple weeks
yeah,
here, or is that
yeah.
still under wraps?
No, no, no. We're good to go. So
All right, let's go.
we I never went to advertising week. Uh And everyone's like, go to the party. I never went. I just, again, I always felt like I'm just a stand up who's doing creative. But um, Donnie and I were talking. We're like, he's like, we should get to these conferences. We should be part of this. I'm like, what are we going to say? Like, nobody gives a shit about it. And so we started talking about AI, and it was like, I bet that's all they're going to talk about is AI. Like, it's in LinkedIn. Like, everybody's freaking out about it. Like, everybody's talking about AI, and like, so we connected with the guy who does programming for Advertising Week, who, interestingly enough, is a former comic.
Wow, what a small world.
Yeah, so we had this idea. We were like, we should just roast AI. Like that would be great. And so he goes, "Love it. I want you guys to close out the Advertising Week." We're like, so we're the last thing. So we're the last event at Advertising Week on
So
the
good.
9th. And we're roasting AI. So I've got 6 comics. We've got a comic who's playing AI, and we've got 6 comics that are going to get up and like kind of roast AI.
I love
We're
it. I
developing it
love
right
it.
now, so it should be fun.
Who's going to be the sit-in for AI? Is it going to be Elon? Is it going to be
Yes.
who's going to be sitting in the dais?
Could you imagine if I'm like, and playing AI as Elon Musk? Um, no, we've got this guy. There's a guy named Chris Griggs, who actually was an advertising guy, and then he went into stand-up. Very similar trajectory of mine. So Griggs is just going to sit up on stage and play AI. The interesting thing, this is what's kind of the twist on it, is so the comics are writing material, and then as they're performing the material, the roasts are getting fed into like a chat. And so when Griggs gets up at the end and roasts everybody back, the jokes will be generated based on the prompts from the comics.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So they'll
So
have
we don't
like
know we actually don't, like, AI actually might be funnier than that. We don't
yeah,
know.
we won't know till we know, huh?
Yeah.
I wonder if
So
anything's been done like that around comedy. That's pretty cool.
I don't know. I mean, he's going to have an earpiece teleprompter, and he's just going to read the jokes. So we'll see. Hopefully it works.
That's great. I
Yeah.
love it. So much fun. All right, man. This is great. I love, when I used to work in the YouTube space and everything was about going viral, I used to travel around the country and do this keynote, like, well, I don't know how to make your video go viral, but I can give you 3 ways that can give you the best possible shot.
Mm.
And it was always make them cry, make them ask, was that real? Or make them laugh. Those were the 3 best shots you had in the toolkit. So, I think we need more funny in the world. I can't remember a more depressing time than the COVID Super Bowl where everything was like, stay safe, stay safe.
It was just like saluting our heroes one after another.
Oh man, it was
Love
just
them,
like,
but
I get it was a moment in time, but like, I'm so glad that funny Super Bowl ads are back. And I think if it's anything that the world needs more of, I think, we've seen through like attempts at cancel culture and all that, like the comedians are, they're the canary in the coal mine. They're the weather vane in society. Like you said, that, needs to be always pushing the limits of what's acceptable and what's funny, because I think it's like, that's the best way to diffuse all the craziness in the world, is when we can take ourselves and the things that we're experiencing less seriously and have that kind of like deflationary release valve. I think that's that's what comedians do in society. And then I think brands that can tap into that, you've obviously shown that that's a huge way to generate brand loyalty, brand love, awareness, all the things that matter. So I'm a fan. I'm going to be watching excitedly from the sidelines at what you guys do next. If anybody who's watching the show wants to get in touch and reach out and learn more about what you guys are doing at Brand Up Comedy or connect with you directly, where do you want to send folks?
Yeah, I mean, David at Brand Up Comedy. There's 2 of us, David, Donnie, DANI. So get us while you can. Yeah, or hi at Brand Up Comedy, but we're brandupcomedy.com, and there's some, some of the work that we've done up there, and we'll talk to anybody. Seriously, we'll talk to anybody, just because like there's such great conversations. Like, even if nothing comes of it, it's just great to like connect with people from a humor perspective. Like, I don't know that I've had, knock on whatever, I don't think I've had a conversation with anybody. It's like a tough one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Well, it's hard to have a tough conversation when you're, taking something as levity of like, how do I inject humor into my brand? I think we all would like to be better and continue to sharpen our toolkit to do that type of work better. So awesome. Well, David, glad that we were able to connect. Excited to see what you guys do next. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And for those of you who are at Adweek, don't forget to check out the Roast of AI when these guys present on the final day of Adweek. And for everybody who's watching at home, if you give us a follow or a subscribe wherever you happen to be seeing the show, that's how you'll see more thought-provoking interviews with thought leaders and advertising experts like David in the future. And if you are listening to the show, if you give us an honest review, that's how we find a wider audience organically. And last but not least, if there's a stand-up comedian out there somewhere in your life, a brand manager who needs to be more funny, or just someone who you think would benefit from hearing the show that I had with David tonight, don't forget to share the show. And with that, David, I will let you go. Good luck at Ad Week, and we'll talk again soon.